The Kroot Trail Shaper, a great miniature that has yet to be released by GW, and because I want it in my army to play with, I'm going to kitbash one today using an old Kroot carnivore and some leftover bits from the Farstalker kit. So here we have both the leftover bits from the Farstalker kit and my leftover first edition Kroot here. The mold lines are terrible. But the main part of this is to get as close to the actual GW imagery as possible. So I'm going to be using a couple parts from the Farstalker kit, but the most important one being this rifle right here with the ejection port open. I feel like it conveys the same vibe as the reloading Kroot with the break action. With all the parts secured though, we're going to clean up the mold lines and any of the sprue mess that may be left over. Complete this throughout the entire miniature. We want smooth surfaces. I'm going to glue the torso to the legs here, just because we want this to be nice and securely glued before we start painting. And I'm going to use some tack just to kind of create a mock-up real quick of what we're going for. So we have the reloaded rifle in one hand, the outstretched arm in the other. I have a head with a helmet kind of doohickey on it. Not quite the same as they have in the Shaper image, but pretty damn close. And this chainsword as well. But we're going to go through the bits box here and try to find things like this little, drumstick. I want various bits that make this look more Krooty. So first up, I located this green stuff. I think it was supposed to be a purity scroll at one point, but we're going to use it as a belt today to hide the seam in between the torso and the legs. I also found this. This is from the original Kroot carnivore kits as well. It's kind of like a bandolier, I guess, for the gun. So it's a strap for the gun. And then finally, I found a better meat hook slash, thing to eat on a hook here that we're going to use instead of the original drumstick I found. So with the bulk of the bits located, I put the belt and glued it in around the waist of the Kroot to hide the seam. This guy's also been under the contract of the Farside Enclaves for so long. He's basically an honorary fire warrior, so he has the Enclave's pauldron as well, partially to hide the seam in the arm that exists there. We've got these extra hooks and knives. I'm probably not going to end up putting these on the miniature, but they're here and prepared just in case. The head, this is the head I chose with like a gas mask and some canisters instead of the draped leather helm. I thought this one worked a little bit better for my purposes. And finally, we have the chain sword that's all wrapped up in leather from the Farstalker kit as well. We also have the arm. I glued the arm together as well as put the strap on, and that's what you get here for the reloaded gun. Abaddon Black would be used as the base coat before spraying the whole thing with Baylor Brown. This is going to form the base of our skin tone here. To get the skin done right, we're going to start by dry brushing with Everland Sunset here all over the miniature. Before transitioning to a Uriel Yellow over a smaller portion of the miniature than the last dry brush. Mainly focused on areas where the highlights from whatever your desired lighting source would be. In this case, a global illumination source is all I'm using. Finally, using some Flash Gets Yellow will give the most extreme areas of the highlights another dry brush. A Seraphim Sepia wash was then used all over the skin to bring some depth to the tones and unify the various yellow colors that were used. Using some Screaming Skull, I then picked out the body of the miniature, the various alligator-style belly sections here. I'd also do the fingernails, the toenails, and the spines across the miniature as well. Rhinox hide was then used to pick out all the leather bits, including the belt and the sash thing the Kroot wears. I would then take some Mournfang Brown and do a combination of overbrushing with a fine tip brush and edge highlighting to bring some variation and depth to the leather. So it looks like there's some wear and tear, maybe from the weather, but overall it's designed to give this area a little bit more visual interest and shake up that brown tone from being so flat. And just like anything else, when it comes to me doing leather or Kroot bellies, we're going to take that Seraphim Sepia wash. You can use Argrax Earthshade as well. I've transitioned to a Sepia wash because I've run out of Argrax. Either way, the effect is the same, just to different degrees. You're going to want to get it all over the leather, and in regards to the belly scales, only get it in the crevices. So take a fine tip brush that you don't mind being a wash brush, and pick out the belly scales as I'm doing here. Basically, it's just a recess shade. And then, remember, we want to shade all the Screaming Skull bits across the miniature, so the fingernails, the toenails, the spines, etc. For the shoulder pad, we'd start with a base coat of Corn Red all over it. With that dried, we're going to take a dry brush and some Mephiston Red and just dry brush the main central part of the shoulder pad where most of the light would be hitting it from above. Just tickling the edges. We're going to do the same thing with Evil Sun Scarlet, just more centralized to the middle of the high point of the shoulder's curve. The same thing will be continued with Wild Rider Red. Before a final dry brush of Troll Slayer Orange directly in the middle. These are very subtle, but they create this nice highlight of this deep red. Now, off camera, I picked out the white bits using some Corax White, and then highlighted that with some white scar, sorry, nearly forgot my color tone, and then picked out the Tau symbol with Abaddon Black before picking out the little dot with Evil Sun Scarlet. Sorry, the Farsight symbol, not the Tau symbol. Now, I painted a head basically the same way as everything else in the video, including the shoulder pad. The crest was just painted like the shoulder pad, except I threw a dry brush of Uriel yellow at the end of the orange. That's it. And then once assembled, I put the base together. Very typical base, just threw some flock on there, and I put this little flight stand, I guess you could call it, on the base here for the defining feature of this miniature. Something that can take it from a Kroot carnivore with some uniqueness to that trail shaper. But before we get to that, let's paint up the chunk of lunch this guy's got on his hip. So we're going to start off with Bugman's Glow as a base coat before layering on top of that with some Cadian flesh tone. Ball red will be used to pick out the underside where the exposed meat and ribs are, giving it a really, fresh feel. This would continue all around, including just a little bit on the edge here. We want to make sure there's clearly layers, like it's like a side section of a cake. We got the Bugman's in the middle, the ball red at the bottom, and the Cadian flesh tone above. And then once that's dry, the whole thing's going to get a sepia wash. You could probably have picked out the ribs at this point in Screaming Skull as well. I did it later on and then gave it an Argrax wash. Doesn't really matter. Now, everything was going to get a quick dry brush, well, just the peach section of the flesh with Kislev flesh. This will help tone down the brightness and the glossiness of the wash we just used. We'll also give it more of that slightly pallid, like not okay, fresh caught, but not quite fresh meat. It's still got some life in it, but it's not alive. And then finally, to mimic the miniature that Games Workshop will eventually release, I decided to try to do a tattoo like the box art guy had, except I'm not great at freehand, so I decided to give him a For the Emperor prison tat, as if he was just like quickly carved into before being forced into a penal legion and then died to the Kroot. Because, I mean, he's clearly not alive. For all the metallics in this video, it's Iron Hand Steel and then a Nuln Oil wash. Literally for all of them. Now, for the part that's really going to bring this miniature up, I decided to take the bird from the Farstalker kit and give it a successful gray and white dry brushes before giving it some Black Templar contrast to give it like a quick slap chop kind of highlight effect. I didn't quite like how strong it was, so I went through with the Thunderhawk Blue to kind of tone it down a little bit. After the black had dried. But with everything done, I then went through with various grays and whites and dry brushed a bald eagle style head onto the alien bird. The idea of Xeno eagles is just cool to me. So we also picked out the feet with some Screaming Skull before picking out the beak with some Uriel yellow here. Just a quick and dirty Xeno eagle that we can get on our miniature, giving it a really distinct look from a regular carnivore or a war or flesh shaper. I figure the bird's going to be finding the trails with him, so this was perfect. Quite pleased with how he turned out. I'm going to give him some Seraphim Sepia wash on those toes here. And then we can put it on the miniature. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with how he turned out. I'm really glad that I quickly whipped that eagle onto the base. I was going to do it something else as like a base topper to give him that extraness that he needs to be a character, but I think this is perfect. Everything would get a final matte varnish, and we'll go on to our grand reveals next. But if you stayed this long, please remember to like and subscribe. Everything helps out a little bit, and I'll see you next week. like I said, I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I think I nailed quite a few elements of the GW sculpt. We've got the gun in a reloaded position with the breech open. We have a big flab of meat attached to some meat hooks with a tattoo on it. I have a masked Kroot head and a nice little tactical rock on the base, and I think the bird really helps sell Trail Shaper.